All right, Victorum Gaming fans, we are back with another video for SPQR. Today we're taking a look at Gaul and giving that a little faction overview and review of how these guys play and things to look out for. So again, as usual, you get your standard sort of introduction to their history, military history, different tribes, things like that. And as usual, we will start off with looking at the heroes. So again, another faction that gets that budget hero at 45 denarii. You get your +1 ranged, +2 melee, 2 melee dice. Really good agility and bravery there. No armor and 2 wounds. And no equipment that they come with. But again, you get this sort of giant toolbox of options here to really customize these guys to your sort of heart's desire here. So you get the options between small shields, large shields, leather armor, chainmail, helmets, short spears, daggers, an axe or a great axe, swords, two-handed swords, bows. You can mount these guys for 30 denarii. You can also give them javelins if you want. So again, just about anything you could really want to build in a hero you could. So light, medium, heavy infantry, more of a skirmisher, just really like close combat monster, mounted warrior to lead your cavalry. Anything and everything is possible here. So yeah, quite a really diverse selection of hero abilities here. Okay. Beyond that, no other special rules or anything, but again, building some really rock-solid heroes for the Gauls is definitely possible for these guys. Like the Britons, we see that these guys get access to druids, and again, we talked about that in the other video, so we don't need to go into full detail again here, but basically, druids give you sort of like a couple of pseudo-magical abilities here, where basically you can have enemy heroes suffer -1 penalties to their characteristics, beyond that, sort of a buff here where, but yeah, your druid may not be challenged by an enemy hero. He can challenge himself though if he wants. But then any Gaul unit that druids lead may reroll any of its own melee dice in combat. So again, all that for 75 denarii. Not too crazy in the way of stats or anything. So you do have to protect these guys. But just having that debuff to an enemy hero and the buff to your own unit, well worth considering that for 75 denarii. So that leads us out of the heroes to our standard sort of unit, which you'll have likely very many of and in large numbers. So the sort of bog standard warrior unit for the Gauls, 9 denarii. Again, solid stats across the board, only +1 agility and bravery, but melee is where it's at, so +2 there and 2 dice. And for that 9 denarii, you actually already get a large shield and a sword. And honestly, depending on what you're, how you're organizing your army, things like that, that can be enough. That gives them basically 2 parries at range, 3 in combat, and they do have that strength in numbers and wild charge rule. So basically, this is a horde army. You can kit these guys out to be fairly elite with, you have chainmail and other stuff below, which we'll take a look at in a second. But that strength in numbers really is kind of like the mantra for this type of an army. But let's see here. We can give them javelins, so a little bit of ranged ability there as you get close. Short spears, leather armor, chainmail shirts. That's getting towards more medium infantry for protection, and also at 12 denarii for the upgrade, right? You're at 21 points already, so that does make them more expensive. But having maybe like an elite unit that you stick a hero into could be really cool. You can give them helmets if you want even lighter armor. You get the horn and standard options as well, so definitely well worth investing in those. You can also go skyclad with these guys, so some warriors choose to go into battle naked, trusting to their faith for protection, and taking advantage of the unnerving sight this caused. If a unit of warriors does not take any armor other than a large shield and their miniatures wear no clothing, they gain +1 bonus to melee checks. So if you build your unit basically naked, and Warlord does have a specific kit for these guys where they're all naked, having a +1 bonus to your melee can be really crazy, again at the sacrifice of literally no armor. But when you're throwing just tons and tons of units and models at the enemy, some are at least bound to get through and really having +3 melee, and even on a charge is ridiculous. It can definitely cause some serious damage. Again, that strength and numbers rule, so basically everything above 10, they get a bonus to their bravery. If it's above 20, it's another bonus. And then that wild charge ability, so if they charge, they gain a bonus melee dice for each model in the unit, regardless of whether they get into contact. So, if you can get a giant unit of skyclad guys on a charge, you're looking at +3 melee, lethal if you get the charge off, and then basically 3 melee dice apiece for that charge. That can just be absolutely brutal, especially if the dice are on your side and the opponent doesn't manage to parry too much of it. Definitely the core of your army, I guess, unless you're theming this more of like on a cavalry force, which we'll come to in a bit here with cavalry units. But warriors, you got all kinds of options here. So maybe a light harassing unit with some javelins, to sort of even light and medium applications here with depending on the armor you give them. But really, I think, as it says here, your strength is in your numbers. So just throwing tons and tons of units at the enemy and hoping to cause as much damage as you can on the charge. Your unit might eventually die. Attrition definitely doesn't go on your side if you don't have the armor. You better hope that your large shield and sword can parry enough of their attacks to not go through. Depending on how things go, if you cause a whole bunch of damage on that initial charge, things are probably looking good for you. If it doesn't go so hot, your numbers can definitely get whittled down pretty quick. Warrior is definitely really one of the best parts of the Gaul faction. All right, then we move on. So we get our horsemen. Clocks in at 26 denarii. Standard here at +3 melee. So again, I'll say that again, standard +3 melee. Well worth paying attention to that. That's awesome. They do have +1 ranged, 2 melee dice, no agility, but +2 bravery, +1 armor, and then the 2 wounds for being a horse. So equipment, a horse, a short spear, and a small shield. So initially geared towards combat. And again, that short spear can be pretty nasty when you get the charge off too. You can give them some javelins if you want to basically have some little bit of harassing ranged fire there. You do have the option of, again, sort of going sort of light, medium, and heavy on the armor, which again doesn't slow your speed down at all. Only barding would do that for the horse. But again, you're starting off at 26 denarii. If you bought them a chainmail shirt, you're looking at 38. Which that's a pretty hefty investment, so that's something you definitely need to crunch the numbers on. Again, having these guys be almost like heavy cavalry, you don't necessarily think of that for the Gauls, so you might be able to catch some opponents with that. They do have hit and run, so if you don't go the chainmail option, you can do the hit and run rule. So that seems to be maybe more their bread and butter. But you can give them swords too for 3 denarii, might be a reasonable option. And then a horn and a standard, which is pretty standard for your options there. So by and large, this is probably better as like a light cavalry type unit. You're going to go in and clear out the flanks with these guys. You should be hitting most of the time with that +3 to melee, and really you're going to have to do most of your damage on the charge with that short spear. Now, buying a sword does give you that option for some extra parries if you want to stick around a little bit longer. But again, you might also want to consider a little bit more armor. That +1 there isn't going to keep you around too long, even with the 2 wounds for being a horse. So something to consider. But the cost can definitely go up pretty quick. But again, +3 melee to start with is really cool. So beyond that, our true sort of missile unit for the army are tribesmen. 7 denarii there, just +1 range, +1 melee. Still 2 melee dice though. 1 agility, 1 bravery. And they can either come with bows or slings. Pretty much the models that Warlord releases all come with bows, if I'm not mistaken. So you might have to do some converting to get slings or use some other models. But even with bows, they're just fine. But the sling option's of course cool too if you want some really long range firepower. You can go a different route too and bump up the points a little bit to give these guys some javelins. Armor, you do have that too. Again, you can sort of transform these guys into some light combat infantry harassing type guys if you don't want to just sit back and shoot. So you got options for helmets and leather armor. Again, the points cost will steadily rise up, even small shields and swords. So if you kind of go all in on the combat options there, you're going to clock in pretty close to 20 points, but you kind of have a toolbox unit too where, yes, they can move and shoot with their bows, maybe javelins if you went that route. And then if they need to get into combat, they can do some work too with their armor, shields, and some swords. So definitely you're going to be relying on parries more than the quality of your armor. They do have that hit and run ability too, so there's lots of tactical applications for that. And they do also have that strength in numbers rule, so if you can get somewhere above 10, that bravery will kind of take care of itself. But another really useful unit that the Gauls have access to. Then another very interesting unit, which I think we saw with the Britons, right? The war dogs. So you do have to have a certain amount of handlers or tribesmen per number of hounds. But again, sort of another unit that you can just throw tons of these at your opponent. And the dogs can definitely do some nasty work. They also are +3 melee standards, 2 melee dice apiece. Basically they treat their combat abilities as short spears, so when you charge, you definitely can cause some serious damage. Again, that let slip the dogs of war ability, right? So basically their movement is 10 when they perform a melee action, so you can definitely catch opponents by surprise there on the speed. So really another great addition to the Gauls here. Really, you don't really care too much necessarily if these guys die. They're just there to get in your opponent's face and be kind of scary. So that kind of rounds out their basic units. So you got your 4 units, your warriors, your horsemen, your tribesmen, and then the war dogs supplemented by the 2 heroes. On the mercenary front, they can use Germania as a basically an allied mercenary kind of thing there, as well as Dacians and Sarmatians, which we just covered in another video. So well worth looking at there. And then we get on to their heroes. So they have 2, and these guys are really pretty beefy. So we start off with Lucterius, clocks in at 120 denarii, +1 range, a little bit slow because he's got some heavy armor on here, +2 melee, 3 dice, 3 agility, +3 bravery, +3 armor, and 4 wounds. So a whole heck of a lot here for 120. We can actually upgrade him to a horse option as well for another 30 denarii, which would bump his wounds and armor up too. He does have a special ability called Guerrilla Fighter, so before a battle begins, after all forces have been deployed, a warband, including Lucterius, may redeploy up to half of its units, rounding down, up to 12 from their initial position, so long as they can be placed within or behind cover. So depending on how the board is set up and stuff like that, you can really sort of mess with your opponent by rearranging things. And he does have a decent little selection of talents, nothing too crazy. Heroic Rush, Inspire, Lightfoot, Quick Dodge, and Well Planted. And his armor or his equipment here is a chainmail shirt, large shield, and a sword. So pretty basic there, but chainmail shirt's giving him +3, so that's pretty solid there. So his abilities here, as we saw, so Heroic Rush once per battle gets 3 actions. Inspire is again, friendly units within 12 may reroll will to fight checks. Lightfoot, basically he can pass an agility check to jump over small obstacles without penalties. Quick Dodge, basically even if he's out in the open, basically enemies have a -1 to shoot at him. So obviously if you have cover, the cover is going to be more important, but basically he can be out in the open and still be hard to hit, especially combining that with long range. He's probably not going to have to worry about anybody dealing him solid damage with ranged weapons unless you really concentrate on him. So overall, pretty decent little fighter. Has some interesting abilities here. Doesn't seem like he necessarily wants to be sort of right in the middle leading a unit maybe, but with some of his abilities here, it almost seems like he's more geared towards maybe even being closer to the flanks and kind of being around other units just to so they benefit from the will to fight. And he maybe is off hunting either some weaker enemy heroes or getting in some extra damage where he can, depending on what there is available for him. He's certainly not like a crazy tank or anything, so he definitely can be killed, but he's not necessarily going to get there fast with his 5-inch move. But yeah, he's got some interesting abilities. And I forgot to mention the well planted. So basically, he can ignore knockdowns on a successful agility check. So it seems like he almost wants to brawl with some like heroes of generic heroes of his range are a little bit weaker. So he should be able to outlast them with some of his abilities here. And again, being able to play that sort of shell game with your deployment, that can really mess with the enemy as well, depending again on how the board's set up and where cover is and stuff like that. And then we get to the big man himself, Vercingetorix, a massive 220 denarii, and both really just have awesome models, but especially Vercingetorix. So what do you get for your giant investment in denarii? So he's a level 7 hero, in contrast to Lucterius, who's just a level 4. 5-inch move, again, he's loaded down with heavier armor, +1 range, +3 melee, 4 melee dice, +2 agility, +4 bravery, and +3 armor and 5 wounds. So really, really scary stats there on a lot of things. So melee, he is no slouch. You don't better become prepared basically if you want to go one-on-one with him. His bravery is really awesome. So I mean, plus basically rolling on 2 or better to pass that, and really solid armor. 5 wounds, might have expected maybe 6 for him, just considering his points cost, but he does have a long laundry list of abilities too in his talents. And like Lucterius, you can actually dump another 30 denarii into him to put him on a horse if you want to get around the battlefield a little bit faster, but also have better armor and that extra wound. So something to consider there, but 250 denarii at that point is a gigantic investment. His ability is well, frankly, awesome. So, uniting the tribes. If he's present in a warband, mercenaries drawn from the Gaul warband list may be taken for half the normal cost, rounding up. So, basically, you can take your own army as mercenaries and then get them at half their cost, which seems really ridiculously good. That will be something that, especially in like campaigns, could be just absolutely devastating, especially at lower levels where you're going to have more. You're probably already outnumbering your opponent, but you're going to have that much more if you do take mercenaries. So, and then getting into his abilities too, again, just chainmail, large shield and sword, pretty basic, but his talents, again, a pretty large pool there. Careless charge, so he can make a double move to charge, but the enemy gets a free shot. But hey, if you're charging enemies that can't shoot you in the first place, that's not really all that careless. Dirty fighting, so basically if he hits, he won't cause damage, but then there's a chance for a knockdown. Divine luck gives him a reroll. The light foot ability, similar to Lucterius. So basically he can pass agility checks to jump over small obstacles without slowing himself down. And then what else do we have? We have piercing thrust. So if he goes with an attack with that, it's basically -1 penalty to the enemy's armor saves. And again, he's hitting on +3s, and he's throwing 4 dice, so having that ability is pretty solid there. Thundering charge, so he gains a melee dice when he charges, but -1 melee penalty at the same time. So depending on what you're doing, is it worth it to basically for an action, for a melee action or charge, have 5 dice, but you're only hitting on +2. So depending on how things are going, that could be worth it. Maybe pairing him with a druid, for example, in a unit, just to get that reroll. Might be the way to go. And then last but not least, voice of command. So friendly units within 6 inches of him gain a +1 bonus to bravery. So, which again isn't going to be too many units. 6 inches is not that much space, and depending on what's going on, most of your Gaul units are probably going to be fairly sizable. So getting that to really pay off is going to be a little bit tricky. But still, nonetheless, being able to basically add more to your horde of guys here with his special ability is pretty powerful. And beyond that, he's just rock solid as a fighter. And really, you have a chance to knock people down. You can lessen their armor a little bit. and careless charge is probably one that really should scare your opponents. If they don't have a shooting option as a reaction to you being able to get a double move to charge is nasty, especially with him leading like a large infantry unit. So again, you might not think of the infantry units as being all that fast, but being able to, at the right moment, basically get that extra burst of speed and get into combat can make all the difference, especially with this horde type army that kind of favors that aggressive play. So the Gauls are really, really strong. Again, if played well, really the strength here is in their numbers. You do have options of building some medium to heavy units, but again, the points cost goes up correspondingly. So it really just depends on what you feel you have the points for and what you think you can accomplish with that. But you can certainly outnumber people all day long, and if the dice are with you on the charge, it's going to be a rough time for the opponent. So that was our look at the Gauls. If you enjoyed that, give us a like and maybe a subscribe to the channel, and then stay tuned for more SPQR content.